Which punishment, either real or imagined, sounds light or not a big deal at first, but is actually horrific to experience. Being forced to keep your arms up all the time. Reminds me of school asking the teacher if I could go to the toilet. Or that one time you finally have the courage to ask a question and the teacher just doesn't see you and your arm. I was too scared to ask to go to the bathroom in front of the entire class, so I'd hold it. Had some accidents as a kid in the earliest grades because I just couldn't hold it any longer. One year, I had a class where we'd work on our own for much of the time. During that time I could go up to the teacher directly and discreetly ask to pee. That class was an absolute lifesaver. It was the only chance I'd have to pee all day. Every single day, I'd ask to go pee during that class. I could tell the teacher was very suspicious and 100% thought I was just asking to go because I wanted out of class. But to her credit, she let me go anyway. I really did have to pee, badly, every time. So glad she let me go despite her suspicion. Standing at parade rest without being able to talk for 5 hours. In basic training, someone got caught stealing food from the DFAC no more than 20 minutes after we had been yelled at for people doing that. As a punishment, we stood at parade rest from 5 PM to 10 PM without being able to talk and with at least one DS watching us at all times. I don't know how to describe it, but your brain can only come up with so much to do for 5 hours while not moving. We had a guy purposefully lock his knees so he would pass out. Apparently there are clever ways to get out of some of these punishments. I passed out. Not on purpose though. I don't even remember what caused it, but we were in so we were marched into a hallway and had to stand at ease while everyone went in for a haircut. I think there were 65 people or so in my platoon and we were there near lunch, so for a while there was only 1 or 2 barbers compared to the 3-4 they normally had. I don't know, I just remember, after we approached 90 to 120 minutes I felt sick. I was just about to say something along the lines of "Sir, I think I may throw up," when I woke up on the floor with people standing around me. They said I kind of wavered a bit, leaned forward and then fell straight backwards into a concrete wall. The 2 people behind me stepped aside. Rather than stop me, I smacked my head into the wall. Fun times. Closing your hand around a chunk of saltwater ice and holding it there. Dubbed the Salt and Ice Challenge, where people hold onto it for as long as they can stand. It can lead to frostbite injuries similar to 2nd and 3rd degree burns. It also essentially fuses to your skin, so if you try to open your hand it will rip off skin. You need to use warm water to detach it. I did this about 20 years ago, before it was a thing on social media. It sucks. Oh yeah. I remember that. I was 14 or so at a Halloween party and the host's parents had set out a bucket of salted ice water to keep drinks cold. Being dumb teens, we dared each other to stick our hands in it as long as possible. I think I didn't even last a full minute. It was horribly painful. We did an experiment with this in school to check the temperature, not actually touching it. Me and a friend wanted to see who could have the finger in the water for the longest. I can't remember how long I had it in there, but it was blue and I'm lucky it's still on my hand. Was like in 2010. Was not an ice cube though, just cold water and salt. Solitary confinement. You'd think that isolating certain people can be good for society, but in the end it screws up your mind, so bad lots of people come out worse than when they went in. Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It's weird seeing it used so casually in so many prison shows and documentaries, like "Oh, you caused some trouble, that's a week in solitary for you." But in a lot of countries solitary confinement is literally banned because of how inhumane it is. I'm sure it has a place in society. A hostile prisoner kills his cellmate. You can't exactly let him around other people, can you? All we really have to do is give them lots of things to play with and let their individual cell be near people to completely remove the torture parts. Sounds like you don't know what solitary confinement is. Separating people so they have their own cell because they cause issues with other inmates might be a viable solution. But then you risk other inmates purposely causing problems, so they get their own place. Solitary confinement is not that. It's a blank room. Locked away with no windows or bars. No idea how much time passes. Nothing to see or do. It's pure madness. Listening to the same song on loop, then skipping parts of the song. This was a form of torture used by the CIA and it's absolutely awful. May I ask what the effects are? If it's the same torture I'm thinking of, the music is also loud and selected to be as disruptive as possible, so sleep deprivation among others. Never would have guessed my four brains neighbors were trained in psychological warfare by the CIA, yet here we are. Way back when I worked nights, my neighbor liked to blast the radio while getting ready for work in the morning, even though I repeatedly asked her not to. It is torture when you are so tired that you are literally considering walking upstairs and choking the life out of someone just to make it stop. My upstairs neighbor does this even though I've asked her to stop so many times. I've taken to just whipping stuff at the ceiling as hard as I can, and it seems to get the message across. Outlawry. To be declared an outlaw. Today, we think of an outlaw as just anybody who breaks the law regularly. Back in the day, though, it was a punishment. If you were declared outlaw, that meant that you were literally outside of the law and could claim no protection from it. If someone didn't like you, they could freely beat you, rob you, torture you, or even kill you. When the stories refer to Robin Hood as an outlaw, that's what they're talking about. It's not a romantic heroic swashbuckling thing, it's the state of having no claim to any legal protection at all. The king, or whoever he appoints, takes your land. Anybody who wants it can take your stuff, and anybody who doesn't like you can just beat you to death without consequences. They can also put a bounty on your head and have people hunting you to claim it. What do you think would happen if you lost all protection from the law and anybody who brought your head to the courthouse could claim a year's salary as a reward? Tickling. No joke, the Nazis used this as a form of torture in some cases. It doesn't leave a mark, so it's also used in environments like mental facilities, where patients may be restrained and staff go on a power trip. Extreme cases can result in incontinence, vomiting, and a loss of consciousness due to the inability to breathe. It's also easier for the torturer to do it for a long time without it wearing away at their conscience, because the victim is involuntarily laughing, so it's easy to pretend that it's not that bad. My sister and cousins did that to me when I was little. They thought it was a joke and wouldn't stop until I started violently vomiting. Edit. This only happened once. My sister did the same thing. She stopped when I kicked her hard. Sometimes, kicking people really does work. Some people tickle lots, but are not aware that the victim is lots of discomfort because of the laughing. That is just scary. From experience. Getting away with a crime by pleading insanity. Instead of a definite custodial sentence, you get an indefinite custodial sentence. In an underfunded and terrifying medical facility. Maybe for the rest of your life. Yay. There's this fascinating TED Talk about a journalist who goes to talk to a guy in a mental health facility who'd used an insanity defense in his criminal trial. The guy claims to have been lying about being insane, thinking he could just pretend to be crazy for a bit and then have a miraculous recovery and get right out. Nope. Turns out it's a lot harder to convince people you're sane than it is to convince people you're crazy. The guy started trying to do things to convince people he was sane, so the psychiatrists diagnosed him as being a psychopath, because of course only a psychopath would go through all the trouble of trying to convince people they're sane. He started trying to do things to demonstrate he wasn't a psychopath, like showing remorse for his actions, which obviously just convinced the doctors he was a psychopath trying to manipulate people by faking emotions. Guy spent 14 years in a mental health facility when he could have gotten 5 in prison for the original crime. It's a great listen/read. Link has both a video and the transcript. Edit. Appreciate the awards, but I'd rather you donate it to your local food bank or animal shelter. I'd actually rather you buy yourself a Coke or an ice cream bar, or whatever, tbh. Just something tangible and that actually matters, even if it's just to you. Has anyone seen that Black Mirror White Christmas episode? Imagine being locked in a room with nothing. Like, really nothing. And all you have is endless boredom. That's horrifying. I can't remember what country used it, Russia or Japan I think, but one punishment was genuinely known as the white. You'd be given white clothes, locked in a cell with white walls with no windows and a completely white door. You'd get a light bulb on a white fixture, but no light shade. Your bed and its linens would also be white, and you would be fed exclusively on white rice in a white bowl with white cutlery, and to drink you would get water in a white cup. After a day or two you'd begin to hallucinate, because of the lack of visual stimulation. Isolation. There's a reason solitary confinement is considered a form of torture. The human mind isn't designed to function in an environment devoid of stimulation or social interaction. It was cool going to Alcatraz and doing the audio tour. You go into one of the solitary confinement cells with the door closed behind you. It's pitch black, and while you're in there, you hear stories from inmates, dramatically read about what it was like and how some of them would focus their mind until they could see a tiny speck, and within that they could conjure an imaginary television screen and see moving images. Help them to stop going crazy. I just found out I have aphantasia, so I can't see images in my head. I wonder if I'd fare a lot worse in solitary confinement in Alcatraz. Wasn't on my list of things to consider today, but it's vital I find an answer. That conditions blows my mind. It's so hard trying to think about how you experience thoughts. It's almost like a list of facts, without the list, that's the point, so I know enough about the concept of what I'm thinking of. If I think of a ball, I know it's round, because it's a ball. But the color, size, type, texture of the ball aren't important for being a ball, so they don't exist, unless I specifically add them to the list of facts. When I was around 10 years old, being forced to stand in the corner of the living room with my parents and siblings in the room and stare at the wall for hours. I remember a TV show once that suggested timeouts be 1 minute long for every year old the kid was. Not sure if that's based on any science, but it seemed reasonable to me. But I also can imagine giving my 10-year-old a timeout. That was Supernana's whole thing. I'm also unsure whether it is evidence-based, but she also didn't have the kids just stand there, but when it was over would have the parents explain, in a developmentally appropriate way, what the kid did wrong, and then have the kids and the parents hug afterwards. It seems a lot more constructive than just putting a kid in timeout and telling them to think about what they did. I remember Supernana being criticized for the timeout punishment. I might remember wrong. What's described above you sounds very similar to restorative justice, which works extremely well in a high school setting. The kid gets to go somewhere quiet away from whatever it is that is triggering them, and have their melt in peace. After, they come back for a private restorative chat with the teacher, where each party explains how they felt during the confrontation. Then they can start fresh with a clean slate. Chinese water drop torture. Victims were strapped down so that they could not move, and cold or warm water was then dripped slowly onto a small area of the body, usually the forehead. The forehead was found to be the most suitable point for this form of torture because of its sensitivity. Prisoners could see each drop coming, and after long durations were gradually driven frantic as a perceived hollow would form in the center of the forehead. You're sorta right. They were blindfolded and leaned back. You were also restrained, and maybe had earplugs or rags stuffed in your ears. They removed all senses. They also would vary the rate of the drops. The torture comes in when you throw off their sense of time. They have no idea when to expect the next drop. That's UHH. That's actually kinda genius. I feel bad for being impressed with how effective I feel that torture would be. Mythbusters actually did a bit on it with Carrie as the subject. No one expected it to work, but she was reduced to a gibbering mess shockingly quickly. It was more to do with being tied down / restrained than the actual water drops though. Basically caused her to have a panic attack as far as I can remember. Didn't Adam also do it, but was unrestrained and basically just chilled and took a nap? I'm stretching the definition of light here by a long way, but when I heard of death by 1000 cuts I thought I would be someone giving you a bunch of cuts until you bleed out. Painful, bit extreme, but the reality is so much worse. Turns out cuts is a bit of a mistranslation, and it should really be slices. The executioner slices big chunks off your body systematically, up to muscles and whole limbs, with the aim of keeping you alive as long as possible. There are a handful of pictures of the process being done which are just about the most horrific thing I've ever seen. I read somewhere that there's a spiritual side to this as well. I think it's Confucianism, but it'd have to double. Basically, this punishment also affects your soul, making it so your soul can never find completion, and so you can't find peace or reach the afterlife. Something like that. So not only is it horrifically painful, but people believed it also ruined their afterlife. Edit. Corrected Buddhism to Confucianism. Dude, there's no soul in Buddhism. The lack of a permanent self is literally one of the core principles. Never studied Buddhism, but I did go back to find more information. Unfortunately I don't have a link. But what was actually said in the video I was watching was Confucianism. Not Buddhism, my bad. That farm pit punishment they used to use in Eastern Europe, where the criminal is made to stand in a pit on a hog farm for a day, which starts out empty, but then the hog manure pours in with them as the hogs produce it. I'm always shocked by the number of people who consider it better than jail etc. when it's brought up, just because it's only a day. Sounds similar to the chicken poop prison in Thailand. You'd end up in severe respiratory distress due to the ammonia. People rarely survived a month and former inmates were left with chronic lung disease and PTSD. Infuriates me that people think the only form of punishment needs to make the person worse not better. Since you said imaginary, there was a punishment shown on Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, that Black Mirror copied a couple times, and science fiction has used as a concept, likely before DS9. The concept is time dilation, the idea that time takes place at a different rate in the real world than it does in some other. So for the punishment, the character Miles O'Brien was strapped in a chair for an hour and sedated, and he dreamed he served a 10-year prison sentence. Or maybe it was longer, but in his mind, he was trapped in this cell for years and years. In the dream, he may have been deprived of food, he was definitely deprived of social interaction, but at the end of it, he woke up, and only an hour had passed. Actually, the best Next Generation episode, The Inner Light, played with time dilation as well. Same with the best Voyager episode, Blink of an Eye. There is a short horror manga story called The Long Dream by Junji Ito that has this concept. A man is admitted to a hospital because every night his dreams are longer. Slowly his dreams become long enough for him to experience an entire lifetime in a single night, only to wake up and barely remember what the reality is. Eventually the dreams become thousands of years long, and, well, things become very horrifying. I highly recommend it. Edit. I also recommend Stephen King's short story The Jaunt. Same concept, someone experiences years in a single moment, and them up horribly. That's in my collection. Ito has some wacky concepts, but this is one of my favorites of his. Genuinely seems like the kind of thing that would destroy you. My cousin, Tenyo, quite agile, never sits still. Once he troubled my aunt so much that she punished him. His punishment was to sit still on the bed and do nothing. No TV, no playing either on phone or with his toys, not even speaking. No one was allowed to come to his room, so that he even can't watch others. He asked her to read his textbook as he thought studying would lessen her anger, but she denied even studying. He had to sit completely still. Initially that punishment seemed quite simple to me, but what impact it had on a small child was huge. This punishment tortures you by boring you, which a small child can't take. At last he broke down crying, after which he was pardoned. My dad used to make me sit on the couch and not let me read for hours, my only real hobby, whenever I did anything that vaguely annoyed him. It was awful. Japan has weird labor laws that makes it difficult to just fire people, so instead they send employees they want rid of to what can only be described as boredom rooms where they just sit and do nothing all day until they can't take it anymore and quit. I have no shame. I'd probably just set up with all the books I haven't got to and go through all those, then go to games I haven't played, and then eventually just quit once I run out. Should get me a few months of functionally free paychecks. Waterboarding. If any of you kids don't know, this was a big debate back in the early 2000s. Some people were calling it torture, others were more or less like it's literally just pouring water on someone's face. What's the big deal? Now, when you put it like that, yeah, what's the big deal? Take someone, make them lay down, and hold them down, so they can't move, pour water on their face. What's the big deal? I remember one conservative radio host got the bright idea to prove live and on the air that it's not as bad as they are saying by having his staff waterboard him on air. And you know what? I respect this guy for doing this. He had a strongly held belief and he was willing to go through it to try and prove his point. He lasted all of 15 seconds before he tapped out of it, hacked and coughed for about 5 seconds, and finally managed to say definitely torture before suggesting they go to a break so he can recover from that. Good on him for admitting he was wrong. Don't forget that you're on a slight decline, so the water actually flows up your nose. That's what makes actual waterboarding so bad. I've tried it on a flat surface. High school guys, what are you gonna do? LMAO, and incline, and as long as you know when the water's about to hit you can control your breathing and not panic while gently blowing air out your nose and keeping your lips sealed. If it's done on a decline. We had 7 guys try it and no one made it longer than like 11 seconds. The water flowing up your nose is pure adrenal terror, and I would not subject myself or anyone else to it. White room torture. Everything white, tasteless, no sound, room temperature kept at body temperature, if I remember correctly, just a bed, toilet, water, and food, nothing that could be used in any way to alleviate the boredom. It doesn't seem that big at first, just nothing to do for a while, but it's in truth some of the worst torture one can experience. There are a couple of Black Mirror episodes that riff on the theme of boredom as the ultimate punishment. The Christmas episode was horrific when you think about it. In both cases, it shows the flip side of what happens if we had the technology to capture our brains and stick them into a computer. It means we can live forever. On the downside, we could be punished forever with boredom. That White Christmas episode always gives me anxiety, where they crank it up to 1000 years a minute and leave him in over the weekend. Not to mention the radio playing over and over and getting louder every time he breaks it. When my grandmother was in Auschwitz, the Nazis used to make girls sing for them. Being forced to sing for the very same people that threw your mother, father, sisters, and brothers into the gas chambers is a horrific thing. Same with cooking. They'd raid villages looking for undesirables. Their neighbors were forced not only to cook for the Nazis during their stay, but participate in digging huge pits for their friends to eventually die or be buried alive in. Edit, to boot, because some people were buried alive, those huge pits would be moving/making sounds for almost days after being covered up. Those same neighbors had to experience that. This is the end of the video. Thank you guys for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed watching this, you might as well watch these too.